All right, so I'm going to share a topic with us today that is maybe new and probably new to a lot of people. And as such, if it is new to you, feel free to challenge it, especially if find points of disagreement. Um, so the topic I'm going to be talking about today is the topic of what I call an often overlooked component of the mark of the beast. Now, um, I'm not going to be studying the mark of the beast in this presentation. I'm going to look at something associated with the mark of the beast that we often don't realize is associated with the mark of the beast. All right? So let us take a look at what that is going to be. So to start us off, let's do a quick review of some of what we've learned from the mark of the beast. Now, I want to give Brother David credit for this. In his studies, and he has a playlist on YouTube, actually two playlists, maybe three. One of them from the webinars on Thursdays, one of them from last year, where he had a study of Revelation, and he has one previous to that, where he did a study of Daniel and the Revelation. And I'm going to ask us to refer to that for some insights as to the mark of the beast. But again, I am not going to be doing a study of the mark of the beast. But one of the insights I got was the seven heads of the beast weren't seven heads concurrently, but they were a panorama of empires over time. And that was an insight for me that really opened up a lot of doors for me to understand some of the principles and the the concepts of the beast and subsequently the mark of the beast. So from Brother David's perspective, the seven heads were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon under Nimrod, which we call Neo-Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the modern day European Union. From my perspective, I have a little disagreement with Brother David, wherein I believe that the seven heads began with the Babylon under Nimrod, and then went to Egypt, then Neo-Babylon, then Persia, Greece, Rome, and European Union. So we have a difference in that he includes Assyria, and I begin with Babylon under Nimrod, and exclude Assyria. And I understand his reasons for it, and he has very good reasons for it. I have different reasons, a reason as well, and that's, as I said, we can discuss that on another time. But I just want to show that those are the seven heads historically that the beast system has operated from, which is really the devil setting up his kingdom on earth to establish a counter kingdom to God. And as we remember from the study of Revelation, that Jesus established God's kingdom of earth, so you have two rival kingdoms operating in the same sphere. And the devil had a 2,000-year head start in his kingdom. And then Jesus comes in, establish his kingdom, and then the judgment season is about evaluating both kingdoms. I believe we are pretty aware of that. And then the mark of the beast is the mark of this beast, which has the seven heads, where we have our artist rendition here. And the 10 horns are not necessarily on the heads. But again, not the discussion we're going to talk about. What we are going to talk about is something that came up in Revelation 17, where the beast has something else associated with it. And that is the woman. A woman is riding the beast in Revelation 17. And we have reason to believe, and of course there's clear evidence, that the beast of Revelation 17 is the same beast as the beast of Revelation 13. All right, the beast from the sea in Revelation 13. But in this case now, there's a woman riding the beast, and the woman in Revelation 17, the woman is described as a harlot that sits on the beast and many waters. And remember that the interpretation of the waters there is that there are peoples and nations and tongues. All right. The kings have committed fornication with the woman riding the beast. This is I'm just taking bullet points from Revelation chapter 17. Then she makes the inhabitants of the earth to drunk with the wine of her fornication. And then she is called Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And finally, She not finally, but she is drunk with the blood of the saints and and martyrs of Christ. These are all comments, statements made about the woman in Revelation 17. Additionally, there's an indication that the woman in Revelation 17, the beast turned on her and devoured her flesh. Now, if we remember from the previous studies, that this woman was characterized mostly as a religious system that associated with the beast. And so this religious system led people into a state where they were more susceptible to the influences of the beast, because this false religious system associated itself with God, but really led people into following the dictates and the standards and the principles of human government. Most people look at this woman as a Catholic Church. We understand it to not just be the Catholic Church, but that the Catholic Church is a part of this woman. It's actually false religious system. What I am going to do is introduce another element of this woman that is not religious per se, but supports the religious support. So it's not all the various churches only, but it is, in other words, it's not just religious. I'm going to say that it is social. Now, one of the things that gave me an insight in this was when Brother David did his study on Revelation, and the study of the seven last plagues, and particularly the sixth plague, where is mentioned the battle of Armageddon. And if you want to find that, you can go to the Open Face Fellowship web.
Greg, we can't hear you, man.
Oh, I'm out. You cannot hear me?
No,
Yeah, I'm
I
here.
heard him clearly
I'm here.
fine.
I'm
Yes,
hearing
I
you.
can hear
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
you perfectly.
I can
Yeah,
hear you
we can.
too.
Okay, so
Yeah.
check your volume. Well, yeah, someone informed Marvin about that.
Yeah, Marvin, check yours.
So you might need to see it in the chat. So you click on playlists, and then you go to the Revelation 2024 playlist, and the 20th video in that playlist is the one about the plagues and Armageddon. And we're going to take a quick look at that passage in Revelation 16 verse 12 to 16. All right, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about that Armageddon situation there. So Revelation chapter 12 verses Revelation chapter 16, verses 12 to 16. So Revelation chapter 16 verses 12 to 16 says, "Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophets. For they are spirits of demons performing signs, which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Behold, blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon." And so that phrase Armageddon, when you look it up in the historically, I did a little research about that. And again, I credit Brother David for bringing this to my attention from his research. The word Armageddon is a Greek version of a Hebrew term, Har Megiddon, or hill of Megiddo. So the term Armageddon is referring to a place called Megiddo, a hill. I did a little further research, and Megiddo and Mount Carmel are related in that Megiddo is the ancient city mound at the base of Mount Carmel, overlooking the vast Jezreel Valley. So both of them, of course, are relevant in the Bible, because Mount Carmel is famous for the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, or Baal, as some of us refer to them. So Elijah the prophet comes into play here. So now, who is also associated with the situation with Elijah? Jezebel. Now, Jezebel is an interesting woman in the Bible, right? I believe she was a younger woman. Her name is often considered like Jewel. I personally believe that the name Jezebel has something to do with Baal worship because her father was a king, and that king was a lord of a nation, a king of a nation that worshipped Baal. And the Bible says that Ahab was king of Israel at the time. Remember, Israel was a northern kingdom after the nation of Israel, the united nation, Hebrew nation, got split into two parts, and the southern kingdom became the Judah, where we get the Jews, and the northern kingdom became Israel. And then that was led initially by Jeroboam, and then when his son took over, his son was murdered by Baasha, and then Baasha's son was murdered by a guy named Zimri, who then killed himself when Omri was crowned king. And Omri becoming king, reigned as king for a number of years. Then he died, and his son Ahab became king. And the Bible said that Ahab was so evil that he followed all the ways of Jeroboam. And if that was not enough, he married Jezebel. And then Jezebel decided to take over and lead the nation of Israel into idolatry to worship Baal. Now, we always talk about Baal as if it's the only God there, but Baal always had another god, a goddess that went along with him named Asherah. And if you look in the book of Kings, Jezebel actually was the one that sponsored both the prophets of Baal and the priests of Asherah. Baal and Asherah are kind of like Superman and Wonder Woman of the ancient days. They were the superhero gods of the time. All right, Baal was the warrior god, and Asherah was the warrior princess god. And they had their own storytelling, kind of like their comic book versions of them that they will tell around the campfires, and they will tell in the myths, and they would go to temple and they would learn about the exploits of Baal and Asherah, and these were fertility gods. And so, as part of fertility god, there came along with that the temple prostitution and various other such practices. And what Jezebel did was she encouraged this type of worship, and she suppressed the worship of the true God. She started persecuting the prophets of God, and killing them, so that they had to be hidden. And there was a gentleman who was in the administration of Ahab. His name was Obadiah, not the same Obadiah the prophet in the Bible, but a different guy named Obadiah. And he hid 100 of the prophets in caves to hide them from the persecution of Jezebel. So Jezebel wanted to wipe out the influence of God among the people, so that she could establish her own type of worship system, which was Baal worship with the worship of Asherah. So Elijah comes on the scene, and Elijah, his initial introduction to the whole experience was, God says, go out there and declare a famine, and that famine will last until you say. And Elijah goes and declares a famine, and we have the situation of Elijah going by a brook and being fed by ravens, etc. And then at the end of 3.5 years, God says to Elijah, time to go meet with Ahab. And he goes and tells Obadiah to tell Ahab to meet him on Mount Carmel. And this is where the Armageddon situation is related. Mount Carmel is a contest. All right. So on Mount Carmel, we have now the conflict between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And so we have that story in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 to 4 and verses 17 to 40. And there's an interesting passage in that where before the contest, Elijah turns to the people, and all the people came down, the men of Israel came down. And you have the prophets of Baal on one side and Elijah on the other side. And he says, let's have a contest. We're going to have two two cows, and you choose your cow, and I'll take the other cow. And you're gonna go first, prophets of Baal. You're gonna kill the cow and put him on the altar that you will build, and you're gonna pray to your God, and I'll do the same thing with my cow, and whichever bull, and whichever God sends fire down from heaven and burns up the sacrifice, that is the true God. But he turned to the Israelites though before this and said, asked a very important question. He says, and Elijah came to all the people and said, now listen to the question he asks and pay attention to their response. It's relevant to us today. And Elijah came and said to all the people, how long will you falter between two opinions, between two perspectives, between two decisions? If the Lord, if Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. That's a very well-known statement. We know that passage, we quote it many times, but we don't focus on the response of the people quite enough. The Bible says, but the people answered him not a word. This is significant because the people knew who the true God was. They knew that Yahweh was the true God. They knew that Baal was false worship. But they wanted the benefits of Baal worship, and they did not want to be persecuted. They wanted to straddle both sides of the fence. So they would not speak out for God when the time came. They preferred to keep their mouths shut. They weren't speaking on behalf of Baal. They just weren't speaking on behalf of God. The only one that was there standing at that moment was Elijah. That's what the battle of Armageddon is about. In the sixth seal, in the sixth trumpets, or during the seventh seal, in the sixth plague, there's going to be a clear understanding about who the true God is and who the beast is. And people are going to have to make a choice, but they would have already made their choice. They would have chosen the beast system by default because they don't want to stand up at their own detriment. Now, the reason they got to this place is what I want to focus on. The reason is not merely religious. The reason was cultural, and that's what I call the Jezebel connection. So, just a quick side note, after the contest on Mount Carmel, where the fire came down and burned up the sacrifice of Elijah at the end of the day after a prayer, Elijah turned to the people and said, kill the prophets of Baal. And they killed all 450 prophets of Baal. And then Elijah prayed and rain came. And then, the chariot of Ahab got caught in the rain. So Elijah ran in front of him until he got to the city of Samaria. And he took him there safe. And after that victory, Jezebel threatened Elijah and said, listen, by tomorrow, you're going to be like one of these prophets. And Elijah got afraid and ran off into the wilderness for 3 days, got met by an angel. And the angel said, gave him some food and said, eat up, you're going to need it. Then he went into the wilderness for 40 days. And then he went to hear from the Lord. And this is where we hear about the earthquake and the wind and the fire. And God was not in the wind and the fire and the earthquake, but he heard a still small voice, and God spoke to him with a still small voice. Incidentally, many people don't even remember what the message was in the still small voice. That's a very interesting thing. We know about the still small voice, but we don't know what the message is. Actually, the message is very, very clear. And the message to the still small voice is a side note. This is not really related to what we're talking about here. God gave us 3 succession commands. Elijah was gonna he didn't end up anointing this gentleman, but this man was anointed by Elisha. God said he must anoint Jehu to overthrow the line of Ahab. He should anoint Azael to take over the nation of Syria, which is called Aram in some translations, and he should anoint Elisha to be his replacement. So God told Elijah to go find Elisha, train him, and then replace him. That was what the still small voice told Elijah in the wilderness. That aside, Now we have a little indication of the type of woman Jezebel was. After this situation, we have a situation where Jezebel and Ahab colluded to cancel a man to take his property, Naboth to take his vineyard. And Jezebel turned the community against the man who grew up with them. So now we have in the Bible two indications, another indication of Jezebel showing up. And I'm setting up myself here for the point I'm about to make about the hidden component, the overlooked component of the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 to 19 is the message to the churches, particularly the churches Pergamos and Thyatira. Now, if you remember the messages to the seven churches, the first church was Ephesus, then Smyrna. Smyrna is one of the two churches of which nothing negative is said about their character. They were a church under persecution, and God has said to them, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life." But then after Smyrna comes Pergamos and Thyatira, and then after Thyatira comes Sardis, and after Sardis comes Philadelphia, then Laodicea. Laodicea being the one church that nothing positive is said about. But notice that Pergamos came after Smyrna, the persecuted church. After the persecuted church comes the compromising church. And after the compromising church, Pergamos, comes the corrupted church. And here's some things some bullet points that are said from to the church of Pergamos. They were mixing the truth with worldly doctrine. This is where he talks about Balaam leading the people into pagan worship. And this is where the prophet Balaam was mentioned. And so they are introduced into pagan worship, and that corruption was a setup for what was going to happen under the next church, a corrupt church, Jezebel, Thyatira. He talks about a woman in the church called Jezebel that calls herself a prophetess. And this woman, she seduces the congregation to accept pagan worship and make that the norm. And she leads them into complete religious corruption. Now, that's a quick side note here, by the way. Remember that Balaam was a prophet that the donkey spoke to when he was trying to go serve Balak to curse the Israelites. And he was unsuccessful in cursing the Israelites until he came up with an idea to send women into the camp of Israel to get them to commit adultery with them and to get them to start worshiping false gods. And some of these women were included some of the daughters of the king. And the only way that could have stopped was when one of the men was engaging in his activities with one of the women, which was a daughter of King Balak, I believe. And one of the priests came in and saw them going on there and drove a spear through both of them, pinning them to the ground. And that broke the plague that was sent upon the Israelites. So the corruption came in by sexual promiscuity and pagan worship. It was an introduction. The sexual promiscuity was an introduction to the pagan worship. And this woman, Jezebel, brought in that same mindset. She brought in a seductive mindset. Now, historically, we've understood that Jezebel woman to be the Catholic Church that brought in doctrines of devils into the church. As remember in a study previously, David talked about the Babylonish garments that were brought into the camp of Israel that caused them to be unable to conquer in the Battle of Ai. The Catholic Church brought in Babylonish garments into Christianity so that we are led astray into false worship and the power of the Spirit was undermined. But there's another component that I want to bring in here. And that is referenced in Isaiah chapter 3, verses 1 to 5 and 10 to 12. I'm going to read that passage and then I'm going to reveal to you what the other component is. Sister Maxine says, is the mixing of truth with Christmas tree and other things that don't make any sense to me. That's true, but there's much more to it than that. And many people think the problem is going to be a religious problem. But we have a term called culture. You ever heard the term culture? We know what the word culture means. It means about the environment in which you live. But the word culture is a word as its root, cult. And the word cult is just an old English word that means religion. So culture is connected with religion, but there are many cultural practices that may not be explicitly religious, but they have religious implications. All right? And this is one of those that we have not been paying enough attention to. Isaiah was a prophet to Hezekiah and Uzziah, and he was killed under he was a prophet to many kings actually, and the most evil king of Israel was Hezekiah's son Manasseh. Manasseh became king at 12 years old and reigned for 55 years, and he was evil, and he killed the prophet Isaiah. So Isaiah was a prophet during that time. Now in Isaiah chapter 3, this was before God revealed to him in Isaiah chapter 6, where he saw God sitting on the throne. In Isaiah chapter 3, we have a little passage there where Isaiah is lamenting judgment upon Jerusalem. And he says, "For behold, the Lord of hosts takes away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stock and the store, the whole supply of bread and the whole supply of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder." The diviner is like the priest. "The captain of 50 and the honorable man, the counselor and the skillful artisan, the expert enchanter. I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. The people will be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child will be insolent toward the elder, and the base toward the honorable." Isn't that what we are seeing right now in our culture today? Skip down now to verses 10 to 12. So the righteous so say to the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him. Please note carefully what he's going to say now. "As for my people, children are their oppressors," that was alluded to earlier. And here's a key phrase: "and women rule over them." Women exert dominance over them. "O my people, those who lead you cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths." So when children are in charge or women are in charge, we get led astray. Now, I'm going to say some things here that's going to be offensive. And if I were to go to a regular church and preach what I'm going to say right now, I would probably be stoned. Someone mentioned Deborah in the chat. Deborah is one of the more misunderstood women in the Bible. Deborah was a judge to whom Jephthah went. Was it Jephthah? No, it wasn't Jephthah. I've forgotten the name of the guy who went to Deborah. If someone can put it in the chat. This was a man that was asked to lead the Israelites into it might have been Jephthah, to fight against the Amalekites, the Midianites. I don't remember which one it was. And he went to Deborah, and Deborah says, "God has called you to lead the Israelites." Barak. All right. Thank you so much. God has called you to lead the Israelites against these people. But he was afraid to go on his own. And he says, "I'm not going unless you come with me to battle." And Deborah was displeased with that, because Deborah wasn't interested in leading. She was a prophetess that got called to do a particular thing. And this man didn't want to take charge. And she said, because he wouldn't take charge, God is not going to give the general into your hand. He's going to give it into the hand of a woman. So she wasn't giving that as a positive. She was saying, "You man that God has called, who God has told me to tell you that God has called you, you need to take charge and stop relying on a woman to take charge where you should be leading out." All right. God has not called women to lead his nation or his church. He has called the men to do so. But guess who uses women to get his way around? So again, this is where it's going to become a very challenging topic. Oh, I forgot about this. There's one more thing I want to bring up, how it works in the church. So in Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel is brought into the temple to and shown 4 abominations, and each abomination is worse than the first. All right. The first one is the image of jealousy and the entrance to the sanctuary. So I think of this as the Trinitarian doctrine, getting people to worship false gods. This is where the Catholic Church introduced a false god into Christianity, so that when people come into Christianity, they are not introduced to the true God, they're introduced to a Trinity. False worship. Then the second one is a secret society of the teachers of the people. The people who teach the pastors, they are worshiping false gods, Babylonic idols, marked all over the walls in a secret room in the temple. And remember, it says each abomination is worse than the previous. The third abomination is women weeping for Tammuz in the temple. Now that is weird. Why is that abomination worse than the teachers of the teachers worshiping false gods in the temple, in a secret society? This abomination, women weeping for Tammuz, is worse than the previous two. And the fourth one is outright sun worship in the temple. All right? So the top one, I believe, is where the Trinity doctrine is introduced. But the third one is where this element has been introduced into worship in modern day worship. It's not so much the Tammuz part, but who's leading the worship in the temple and what they're leading people into. The women weeping for Tammuz are the women leading people into a false worship, where that false worship is not allowing people to be open to the leading of God. They're more open to the dictates of the culture. And this is the Jezebel connection. I call it the Jezebel recalibration. Feminism. Feminism is the hook of the beast. Now, feminism is not new. Feminism is the new term for what is new. Now, this woman is not mentioned in the Bible, but her husband is. Some people historically believe her name was Semiramis. I don't believe her name is Semiramis. It's Nimrod's wife. Now, from my understanding of history, this guy Tammuz was touted as the reincarnation of Nimrod. After Nimrod died, his wife got people to worship him as the sun god and told people that he became the sun god. Then she became pregnant and claimed that she had been visited by the sun god Nimrod, and he had impregnated her so that she could be the heir of his she could produce his hair, which was actually him being reincarnated. So she got the people to believe that her son that was born was actually the reincarnation of Nimrod. If you look at Babylonian worship is not simply about worshiping a male deity. It's actually a male and female deity. So there's not only a worship of a male god, but she introduced a female goddess as well. And both of those traditions continued throughout pagan religions historically. All right? So this idea of worship of Asherah, along with Baal, was introduced by Nimrod's wife, who we don't know. The reason we use Jezebel as the standard is because she's the crystallized element, the agent, the one that crystallized what true worship of idols looks like. All right? And so because she's the anchor point, we use her as a reference. But there are women before her that had that mindset. It's just that she was the one that was most prominent. So feminism is what I call Jezebelism. And it's a cultural movement that moves people to reject the Bible as the standard of morality and culture. All right? Now, here's an interesting thing about that. In the French Revolution, when the French were rebelling against the Catholic Church, they rejected religion altogether. And they got a prostitute and christened her as the goddess of reason. And they paraded her half naked around France and Paris in particular, and they celebrated and worshipped her as the goddess of reason. This was an outright rejection of religion, particularly God, and putting up goddess worship as a standard. This is the whole idea of political correctness to shut down dissent. I left out a word there. It's supposed to be D-E. It's not decent, it's dissent. I misspelled the word. It's supposed to be D-I-S-S-E-N-T, not D-E-C-E-N-T. I just caught it right now. Dissent against political leadership. So this whole idea of political correctness is don't say anything so you don't offend the wrong people. Remember when Elijah asked the people, how long will he stand between two opinions? If the Lord is God, serve him. If Baal, serve him. And what did the people respond? The people answered him not a word because of political correctness. Here's the other part. It's rejection of masculine leadership in the home and in society. There is a movement these days where men are undermined in the culture and women are built up. All right? There's even a term, this is called the divine feminine. And women are quick to call each other goddesses and queen and princess. You know, there's a phrase in Black American culture called yes queen. Right? Where a woman is or a boss babe. There's another phrase that they use that is a little bit more crass. All right? And so you have that mindset that's coming. And in the church, you have a corruption of religious norms through the pushing of feminist clergy and the usurping or undermining of masculine roles. And one of the things we learn about when feminist clergy comes into the church, right? When feminist clergy comes into the church, usually not long after that, homosexual clergy comes in. All right? And the Episcopalian churches and the Presbyterian church is also are examples of that happening right now in the Anglican church over in Europe. Now, here's more. There's a takeover of the educational systems. This should be obvious to people. All right? I see your questions there in the chat about Semiramis. I will address those later on after I finish the presentation there. The takeover of the educational system is where school systems, beginning from the elementary level, from kindergarten all the way to the highest levels of education, that's college level, are being overtaken by feminist ideology, and people are being taught to reject the fundamentals of biblical masculinity and accept cultural feminism. It rejects, they're teaching women to reject femininity, biblical femininity, such as being raised to be a wife and a mother. They see being a wife as a mother as an oppressive system, while the Bible itself is pushing that as one of the highest calling of a woman. Feminist culture rejects that. And a lot of us have accepted that ideology of feminism for our own daughters, even if we ourselves have not accepted that for ourselves. And you are correct that the feminism, Talia, that feminism has infiltrated the church. It's very, very prominent right now. And guess where it started being infiltrated? Through our Christian colleges. In the past, women would go to college and find a husband as a pastor, then be a pastor's wife or be a missionary wife. Now the women want to be clergy. They say, we are just as smart, just as educated. Why can't we be leaders in the church as well? So, and now you have a lot of churches with female elders, for example. Suzanne says, all of this is what is well documented as part of the Zionist agenda to destroy Western civilization. I'm not going to put it as a Zionist agenda. I'm going to call it a beast system agenda. The beast system works through multiple avenues. All right. So, for example, you have anti-Zionists who believe in this system as well. Take, for example, Muslims. They are very anti-feminist in their approach, but they also have false gods and they reject the truth, and they're eventually gonna fall into the beast system. But they're anti-Zionist. And then you have a lot of left-wing movements that are very anti-Zionist, but at the same time, they're very progressive and very pro-feminist. So it's not just one system. There's a number of different groups that are under the beast organization that is corrupting people My focus here is one particular element that is flying mostly under the radar for most of us because it seems benign to some degree, and that is the influence of feminism in our personal lives, in our educational system, in our churches, in our media, in our entertainment system. All right. The next, laying the groundwork for acceptance of deviant lifestyles. There's a story in the Bible that is very interesting. The grandson of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the son of King Solomon, and I forgot his son's name. I keep forgetting his son's name, but his grandson's name was King Asa. Asa was a righteous king, and Asa was a righteous king, and Asa recognized that his mother, Asa's mother, the wife of his father, who was a bad king, was encouraging false worship, and she even introduced homosexual guys into the culture of the society. And in order to stop that influence, he had to dethrone his mother from being the queen mom. He had to remove his mother from royal privileges to stop the influence of deviant lifestyles, because she introduced that into the nation. Asa's son became Jehoshaphat, righteous King Jehoshaphat. Guess what happened after that? Jehoshaphat's son, Jehoram, got married to Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah, and she led him back into evil. One of the things we've recognized historically through the Bible, or many of us have not recognized, but we recognize through history, that some of the most deviant activities and lifestyles in culture are introduced using women, because people are less, when women push something, people are less revolted by it. In fact, during the Communist Revolution, Mao Zedong's wife, she called herself Lady Mao, was a very instrumental woman in shaping the culture of China to accept communism. And what she did was she took over the media. And when she took over the media, she had a lot of pro-communist patriarchal theater and theatrical works. You know what I mean? Yeah, later on, Maxine, Asa was diseased in his feet as he got older and didn't consult God. But when he was younger, he was actually a righteous king. All right? And he reigned for 41 years. He reigned for a long time. But he also did a good job with his son who took over, Jehoshaphat. But that aside, I was talking about the influence of his mother. And so what we have here is feminism comes in and they bring in these deviant lifestyles, as did occur under Ahab and Jezebel, as occurred in multiple other cultures since then. And one of the things they do is they entice particular women into occult practices and which are rebellious against God. And so you have a lot of young women now who are dabbling in witchcraft and spiritism, and they think it gives them a certain amount of power. It's a practice of feminism. And what it does, it weakens the culture so that they are more susceptible to the mark of the beast. So the mark of the beast, before it is implemented, the culture has to be conditioned. Before Jezebel and Ahab met with, not Jezebel, Jezebel wasn't there, but before the prophets of Jezebel, of Baal, met with Elijah on the on Mount Carmel, there was a cultural conditioning so that the people weren't willing to go against Jezebel, against the feminism of their time. This is what is going on right now. Feminism is the hook of the beast system. And if we are not careful, we'll fall prey, and more so our children will fall prey to the feminist ideology, and they will then fall into the trap of the beast system. We have to pay attention to that. So I have a little warning for us. I'm hoping that this is a start of a conversation that we can have beyond this, about elements of feminism that are active right now in our homes, maybe even within our own fellowship. where we've fallen prey to the traps of the devil. Questions we need to ask ourselves: how much influence is the culture having on myself, on me and my children's view of reality? Notice of my term, on my view of reality and my children's view of reality. We have a false, not false, but a corrupted view of reality that many times we don't realize sneaks into our own approach to the experience we're in right now. I'll give you a classic example. We talk about the end of time and the mark of the beast going to be implemented very soon, and yet still we're sending our children through the beast system for education. And we wonder why our children are not serious about the faith. They're more serious about their occupation, their profession. And the professions they're choosing are many of the professions where the beast system is most effective. I'm talking about professions like psychology, social work, education. And I'm a teacher. I got degrees in education, and I work in that system. And I'm telling you, one of the places where feminism is most rampant is in the schools of education. How much of the Jezebel recalibration, and remember the Jezebel recalibration is recalibrating away from the male leadership to female dominance. And we even have it in some of our terms in our homes. Terms like happy wife, happy life. That's an example of the Jezebel recalibration, because it makes the wife the standard of the home, instead of God being the standard of the home, and secondarily the man being standard of the home. We don't even realize how much it has influenced our way of thinking. How much of the Jezebel recalibration have I accepted into my life and into my training of my children? Third question: am I or my children more like Elijah, standing up against the culture, against the king at the risk of his own life, even if it means standing alone? Or are we more like the Israelites, watching from the sideline? When we're asked a question, we say nothing. When our children are challenged in school with false ideology, they sit quiet so that they don't get in trouble. Whether they're in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, maybe even in the workplace. What do I need to do now to prepare myself and my children to stand like Elijah in the time of the beast? We are currently in the time of the beast. All right, folks? We are in the time of the last head, and after that last head, the beast itself will become the eighth king, as it said in Revelation 17. And I've said this before in the past, and so many people disagree with me. I'm going to say it again. About 5-6 years ago, I said, I believe that the vast majority of the 144,000 will be young people under 20 years old. That's what I said back in those days. Today, I'm saying now that looks like they'll be under 20 or 30 years old, or 25 or 30 years old. I still do believe that. But that means they are our children. If we believe there's an 80% chance that the mark of the beast crisis will occur during my lifetime, then that means it would be a higher chance of it occurring in my child's lifetime. Where will my child stand? Will they be like Elijah? Or will they be like the Israelites? Or worse yet, will they be aligned with the beast system? Will they be the prophets of Baal? Final thing I want to share with us here today. I was looking at this, and there's a verse in the Bible that jumped out at me that's very interesting. And this is a call to the fathers and all the men who may not be fathers but can support the fathers. In Malachi chapter 4, there's a dire, chapter 4, there's a dire warning given to the Israelites, to the people of God, about the day, the great day of God. And I want you to notice what he says in the last two verses. For behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, and all the proud, yes, all who do wickedly will be stubble. And the day which is coming shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts. That will leave them neither root nor branch. But to you who fear my name, The Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and grow fat like staff-fed calves. You shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this, says the Lord of hosts. Now watch what he says next. Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel with the statutes and the judgments. And the law of Moses is Deuteronomy chapter 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might. And you shall teach these principles diligently to your children. When you sit down, when you lie down, when you walk along the way. You shall hang them as frontlets upon your eyes, put them on like glasses, so to speak. And you shall put them over the doorposts of your home. That's the principle of the Moses message. It's not so much the commandments, but the principle of putting God first in the lives of your home and in your lives of your children. Now watch this, verse 5. Behold, I will send who? Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He's talking about these generation. What will the Elijah the prophet do? Elijah the prophet carries the antidote to the feminist influence that prepares people for the mark of the beast. The influence of Elijah the prophet is, he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Brethren, part of the key to resisting the Jezebel recalibration is for fathers to step up and take on the responsibility that God has given us to train our families to resist the influence of feminism, whether in the school or in the church or in social media or in our entertainment systems. We fathers, our fathers among us are, and those who support them, are called to be the standard bearers for the truth of Christ. If we drop the ball as men, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Now, women, this doesn't mean that the women are excused. We have to examine ourselves. There's a story in the Bible that's very, very interesting. Moses, in Numbers chapter 12, got a wife, and his older sister Miriam, a prophetess, was very upset that he didn't consult with her first. All right? And she started spreading bad word about him around the camp, saying, hold on a minute, does God only talk to Moses? Doesn't he talk to me too, to us too? And Aaron, weak little Aaron, was standing up on the side going, and he wasn't saying anything to defend his brother. And God got upset, and God punished Miriam for her insolence. And God's message to her is, listen, when I want to talk to a prophet, I send a dream or a vision. But when I'm talking to Moses, I don't do that. I talk to him face to face. How dare you challenge his authority? And God punished her with leprosy. And Moses came back and said, Lord, you were kind of harsh to her. And God said, listen, if her father had gotten upset with her and spit in her face, she would have to suffer for 7 days. She's going to have to stay with that leprosy for 7 days. What God was indicating is this. When we undermine male leadership in our congregation, we get God upset, and because we are undermining the ability of God to lead his people to righteousness into the promised land. Women are supposed to support the ministry of the men in the church. Men are supposed to stand up for their responsibility to represent God to their children. Be purposeful about training our children, because the culture is ready to introduce them to Baal worship. And when they do that, the mark of the beast they'll accept, and we will be surprised. How is it that my children grow up around me studying the Bible all this time and they're lost? We have no one to blame but ourselves if we allow that to happen. God has called us to resist the Jezebel recalibration and go back to the biblical standard, the old-time religion. That's my message for today. I'm going to take some questions from people, but let us first close off with prayer, and then I'll take some questions.